地球の未来にご奉仕するにゃん For the future of the earth will be of service, nya? So, I'm a big Tokyo Mew Mew fan, and with the new series starting today, I'm celebrating by showing you a work in progress of a few years. It somehow took way too long to get to it in my opinion. Mew Mew Power was what got me into anime, even though there was Yu-Gi-Oh! And Dragon Ball and other stuff on TV before that. And although the dub was bad, I still went gaga over it, and going crazy once there were no more episodes. And I was thus ecstatic once I found the rest of the series on sub on YouTube back in the days. I didn't understand how the internet worked and used up all my dad's bandwidth. Lol. Getting Tokyo Mew Mew merch is quite difficult here though. But a few years ago, I was able to complete my Takara Elegance collection sets by using a Japanese proxy. And I had wanted to make more characters, like Berry and Ringo, and pretty much all of them, but especially Masaya and the Blue Knight, since Masaya and Ichiko are my OTP. Anyway, today I'm making the Blue Knight. Unfortunately, not Masaya, as he wouldn't match with either my Elegance collection set. I mentioned compact doll in my previous video, and the male compact doll body is what I'm using for my Blue Knight today. Unfortunately, I had to make my own head, as the original head was not quite right. I made a mold out of one of the faces of my other Takara dolls, and using a straw to keep the neck all open, I molded and sculpted the head, and after removing the mold and straw, I baked it. I did have to do some carving and sanding afterwards though. I also printed out a to-scale image of his sword, sculpted half of it from polymer clay, made a mold, cast it in resin, and I had trouble with that, so no footage, and that was done more than 2 years ago. After I was happy with the head, although I felt making ledges to keep the head on the neck properly, I gave it a layer of sealant, Tamiya TS80 flat clear, and started drawing the face. I was using my Mew Zakuro as a reference for the eyes, as they have a similar shape and size. I started a basic sketch with a lead pencil, as it's easy to erase mistakes, and after I do the eyes, I realized that the original doll's eyes were mirror images of each other, so I had to redraw one of the eyes to be a mirror image of the other. Kind of the opposite of what you'd think, no? Next, I used a very pigmented black pencil to define the lines and make them easier to follow and paint over. After that, I start with some paint. First adding my blue, as the eye color is blue, then the whites of the eyes, and black. The latter two of which was unfortunately not filmed, apparently. But it's pretty much just following the lines and trying to keep all my lines very thin. After I'm satisfied with the face and make sure everything is clean and neat, I seal again to save everything in. Next up is the hair. It took me ages to find the right colored wefts. I even considered buying a cheap knockoff doll to steal their hair at one point, but none of the dolls I could find had the right hair color. Or too orangey or whatever. I ended up finding some loose wefts in a pack of random colored wefts from a store that doesn't exist anymore in a flea market. Also, considering the size of these dolls, buying a whole hank of hair overseas and paying exorbitant shipping prices wouldn't be worth it. I first paint the scalp light yellow blonde color. Then I prepare my wefts by gluing them to a plastic sheet with a line of fabric glue. Pretty standard stuff. But I later had to redo the hair as it was too bulky, and then I had to use the rubber type glue. Once the glue is dried from, I pull off and trim the wefts neatly. On my first try, I tried using hot glue to put the wefts on the head since it dries quickly. So that's the reason for the bulkiness. But the method is the same for the later try. I glue the wefts onto the head starting from the bottom, keeping the placement around the ears in mind, and going up to the top and gluing the parting wefts the opposite directions tightly against each other. And the hair is now a big poofy mess, so I mount the head onto a store and arrange the hair and tie it down with an elastic before boiling water and then ice cold water on top to tame the hair, alternating a few times just to be sure everything goes nice and flat. After the hair is dry, it's time for styling. I section off the hair according to the different lengths and tying the ponytail off with an elastic. I start by cutting a bit below where I want it and then cutting vertically into the hair to the length I want. I lastly glue a black ribbon over the ponytail's elastic. And the hair is done. And finishing off the head, I use some air dry clay, put it on the neck peg and put the head on the neck peg and remove the excess air dry clay. This is so that I can more or less easily remove the head when needed, but the head stays on. And you can also see my footage is pretty inconsistent. Well, that's mainly because I had to redo the hair. And that's the head and hair done. Next up, clothes. I started off the shoes, making them out of air dye clay and using the same process as I use in my custom willow video. I did record the process, but my camera was off center, so you can't see what I'm doing. So next up was the shorts, which consist of two pieces. I start by sewing together the front crotch seam, then folding over and sewing the pant legs and waistband. I sew the line of decorative stitching on the front of the shorts to look like seams, then I fold over and sew the back crotch seam for a neat finish. I then turn the pants and sew up the leg seams and add a snap at the back for a closure, and I'm done with the shorts. Next up, the coat. It has 16 pattern pieces, 3 of which are red lining for the bottom of the coat. I sewed the 2 back pieces and 2 lapel pieces together at the back, right sides together. Then I fold the 3 edges of the collar over and sew that down. Then similarly all around the edges of the lapel, but not where the collar has to go. Then I sew the shoulder seams of the front pieces and the back pieces together, then folding over and sewing down the seam allowance, and sewing the sleeve cuffs to the sleeves, and folding over and sewing the hem of the sleeve cuffs before pressing all of the seams with my iron. Next, I pin and sew my collar to my lapels, making some snips to make it lay better. Next, I pin and sew the sleeves to the coat, and then sew up the side seams of the coat. I put it on the doll, check how much my seam allowances are, before folding over and sewing the front and bottom hems of the coat. I fold the edges and sew the shoulder epaulette type thingies to the shoulders before adding my velcro to the front with some fabric glue, and adding the collar and lapels with fabric glue to my coat. Then I take my 3 red pieces, sew them together, fold over the edges, matching them out with my coat and sewing them down. Next, I cut a small strip of white ribbon, glue then the edges together, and paint 2 red lines while I mount it on a small bottle to make the sash thingy. Then I use white and black paint to paint tiny details on the coat, like the crosses and the lapels and the black buttons. Lastly, I use a thin black ribbon to tie a bow and sew that onto the back of the coat. And we're done with the coat. Next up, accessories. I start painting a red coat of paint on the handle of my sword, hoping for a gem-like effect for the gems, although it failed and only 2 of the 4 gems are actually red. Then I mount my shoes on the backs of pencils and give them a coat of 2 of blue paint that matches the clothes. Back to the sword, I use white to paint a few layers, excluding the gems. By the way, if the sword looks wonky, it's because of the issues I mentioned at the start. I had to sand it down and the resin didn't cure properly, so it gets wonky when the temperature gets too warm. But it's pretty normal with lower temperatures. But I was super tired of the thing and I didn't really want to make a new one, so I had to make a plan later. Next, I paint the blade and the buckles on the boots with a metallic gunmetal-like color, and then I paint parts of the hilt light blue, the rest of the hilt as well as some tiny details as well as the straps on the boots black, and seal off the boots with a matte varnish, finishing up the shoes and then continuing with the sword again. I directly painted the gems their colors, and then after that everything is dried, I mix up some 2-part epoxy glue and add it over the gems, making sure they keep a round shape, and then over the blade of the sword so that it doesn't flop around. So I figured that out. And we're done. Now putting it all together, I'm super stoked to finally have him done and share with you how I made him. I hope you enjoyed watching me make him and commemorating the series. Please stay tuned to the end for some pictures and something else. Thanks for watching. Bye!
Orei ni tapui, go horsey suunian. In full gratitude, I'll be of service, Nia.